Good morning. In my imagination, let me take you back nearly 2,000 years to the year of around 70 in that first century. And a young man, I'll call him Jacob, exits the great temple in Jerusalem. It's early in the morning and the sun is glistening off the white marble and the gold plate adorning the temple. It's a magnificent and majestic sight. The temple is massive, several football fields long and several wide. It's the second temple in Jerusalem. The first was destroyed by the Babylonians in the 6th century BCE and then rebuilt when the exiles returned. But then in the year 19 BCE, King Herod the Great, began to refurbish and enlarge, rebuild and renew this temple. He filled in valleys and flattened hills to create this huge foundation on the Temple Mount for this majestic temple. It was reported as one of the most beautiful and wondrous buildings in the ancient world. And so here's Jacob leaving the temple, and as he looks out down the valley, the Jordan Valley towards Galilee, in the distance, he sees the first plumes of dust. Surely dust drawn up by horses' hooves. Surely this is the Roman army coming towards Jerusalem, and soon will be the final battle. That's why he's here in Jerusalem. He's just been in the temple, making an offering, a sacrifice, offering prayers. He has been caught up in the nationalistic fervour that's gathered around the nation over these last 18 months or so. In the last 3 or 4 years, the Roman armies have been expelled from Jerusalem twice. The first, this army came, and the guerrillas, the warfare around Jerusalem, sent them packing. And the Romans are stunned by the guerrilla warfare and their tactics, and they leave confused. And people celebrate. Surely this is God. God has defeated the Roman army in this battle. But they know there'll be more. And soon Vespasian, one of the great generals, comes with the troops. He comes down from the north and conquers, subdues the regions around Jerusalem. And he prepares to lay siege on Jerusalem. But as he does, he suddenly, mysteriously turns back and heads back to Rome. Again, God has overwhelmed the Romans and driven them back. Sure. This nationalistic fervour grows and grows and spreads throughout the nation as leaders rise up and call the people to come and join the armies of God for what will no doubt be another final battle. The reason for Vespasian retreating was he was called back to Rome. Called back because Rome was in chaos. The Emperor Nero was dead and the generals were vying for power and control. It became the year of 4 emperors as confusion and chaos engulfed Rome, and there was external peace at least in Jerusalem. And they rallied the troops, they gathered the people together. They gathered them together to build the armies of God to finally oppose Rome. And it would come. Vespasian emerged as the emperor and sent Titus in to finish the work in Galilee, in Jerusalem. He gathered troops from Egypt and Syria, 60,000, and merged onto Jerusalem. He sieged the city and there was fighting for months. Finally the city fell, the city was sacked, and the temple caught alight. It smouldered and burned until it was ashes and dust, and the stones laying in ruins. It was the end. The final battle came and went, but not as people expected. And this is the backdrop for Mark's story of Jesus. This is when Mark is writing, either right at the end of the 60s or around early 70s. And Mark, some commentators are saying Mark is writing to oppose this nationalism that members of his own community and the Christian churches and others are being drawn into this nationalistic fervour to fight violently for God. And he uses Jesus' story to oppose this, to point to a different way, a way that's non-violent, a way that's about resistance in a non-violent way, about a way of love and justice, an alternative in the world that's of God, not of violence. And in this week's story from Mark, it's called the mini-apocalypse, Mark 13. It's apocalyptic literature written in dangerous and dark times, and it's filled with all sorts of funny, strange images of the sun turning red, of wars and fighting and strange creatures and visions and dreams and all sorts of things. A story is to bring hope into the midst of the darkness of the world. And it begins with Jesus and the disciples leaving the temple for the last time before he's killed. And then the next vignette, they're sitting on the Mount of Olives looking out at the great temple, sitting in a posture of judgment. And one of the disciples says, "Wow, look at that magnificent, beautiful structure. The temple, it's magnificent." And Jesus says, "The time is coming when not one stone will be left upon another. It will be destroyed, nothing left." And the disciples ask, when? What are the signs? And Jesus says, "You'll hear of wars and rumours of wars, and leaders will rise up saying, I am he." It's the language that God used with Moses. Moses at the burning bush encountered God and was asked to go back to Egypt to lead the Hebrew people out of Egypt. And when he says to God, "Who will I say sent me?" God says, "I am. Tell them I am sent you. I am who I am. I'll be who I'll be." And Jesus uses this language. People will come in my name saying, "I am." God-like people, messianic figures. People imposing themselves as the voice, the mouthpiece of God, the way of God, the will of God. But don't listen. Don't be deceived, because their way is a way of violence and it's not the way of God. And in our world today, there are people, make America great again, using that language of I am. Divine-like people, figures, rising up to say, follow me, I know the way. And the way will be of power and might and violence against those who are weak and those who are imposing on their nationhood. It's a nationalism once again. Or a Vladimir Putin who is trying to enlarge the borders of Russia, the Russian Empire, and impose himself on Ukraine and other nations. Of greatness, look at me. Even Benjamin Netanyahu and his wall of resistance around Israel to cement this whole area as their land, sovereign under himself and God. This big figure. But in all of these and the many, many other places in which such people rise up, it's the vulnerable and the innocent who suffer. The ordinary people. Life is destroyed and people die. People are persecuted and oppressed and suffering. And it's not the way of God. The way of these nationalistic fervour of power and might, of violence, of warfare, is evil. And it never brings a lasting solution. It always brings more violence. Violence begets more violence. This is what Jesus was saying, and this is what Mark was trying to say in his time, in his people. When will we learn? And into all this is the message of grace. That in this world we look to people who are big and powerful and mighty and charismatic and heroic figures to tell us what to do, to lead us perhaps, to define the way. We look for the ways of inner genius. If only I can become whatever. If only I can overcome, I will find the truth and the life. But Jesus' story is the way of surrender, of letting go and trusting in this God. And that's what his story is about, because ultimately he gives himself on a cross. and the powers and principalities of the world conquer him. He dies. But it's not the end of the story, because love bursts through out of death to bring forth new life and resurrection, hope and peace and truth in the world. This is the story of Jesus. And this is what we're invited into. The way of the cross, the way of love, the way of life, the way of hope in Jesus. Amen.